Good morning, everybody. Today, my partner and I, Ahtesham and Adrian, would like to contribute our informed knowledge about family domestic violence. Even though we don't have any related personal stories to it, we believe that our opinions are well informed about the statistics and important facts with respect to the issue. We're going to present its definition, factors leading up to it, what type of strategies and intervention could be taken to prevent and minimize the impact on victims' physical and mental well-being. Last but not least, we draw occurrence correlations from demographic attributes from FTV offenders from using SAP Business Cloud Analytics on ABS statistics between 7 states: Victoria, New South Wales, Western Australia, Queensland, Tasmania, and Northern Territory. We believe that our visualization reflecting potential correlation, trends, patterns, and demographic variables with discerning policy implications regarding family and domestic violence in Australia. We start off with the definition of domestic violence, which can be defined as the perpetrators using violence to control and dominate the other person, causing fear, physical harm, psychological harm. It could also be a violation of human rights. Can be taken in many forms of abuses, emotional, financial, or even spiritual. When looking at the FDV statistics data in Australia, we believe that the vulnerable groups in Australia are young women, children and older people, people with disability, LGBTIQ people, or Indigenous Australians. Often these populations are vulnerable because they don't have the strength and power to go against the norms and the dominant group. Reports hence often go unnoticed, unreported, and due to the nature of incident, is sensitive and confidential so that people rarely report it. Regarding factors leading up to FDV, we believe that it can be listed at two different traits. Internal traits of the offenders, such as low esteem, jealousy, or even anger, and hard to control the emotion. Other external factors in addition to it are family upbringing, cultural differences, hard to integrate to the society, different ways to solve conflicts, and last but not least, alcohol and drugs abuse. However, none of these can be justified for FDV behaviors and actions. Hence, we have to look at the way to prevent and intervene when it happens. There are three different types of intervention depending on the urgency of the matter. Primary prevention normally takes place in the context of education and community programs, targeting vulnerable groups and stratified population who are at the higher risk of FDV. On the other hand, early interventions are deployed to stop FDV from its early signs. Before it's getting too late, early intervention could press the pause and discard button to FDV behaviors and actions. Otherwise, if FDV turns into serious consequences, it requires crisis response in order to save victims from a high-risk, life-threatening situation caused by FDV. Now, by looking at specific visualization generated by SAP Cloud Analytics, we hope to provide more insights about FDV, particularly in Australia. Comparison between cases in different states. We acknowledge that there is a data insufficiency for not being able to gather for South Australia from ABS for this research purpose. Looking at visualization 1, we summarize all reported cases and others from High, Magistrate, and Children Court to conduct this particular visualization. It is apparent that New South Wales encompasses the highest number of FDV cases in 2018, followed by Victoria and Queensland, while the other two territories in Tasmania are quite minimal compared to them. However, this does not take into account the total population of each state. In order to refine the data, as data per ratio can be more reflective of offenders' percentage out of total population. Furthermore, cases from Magistrate Court can escalate to Higher Court, which could potentially result in double report and data redundancy. Before deploying such data ratio per population, we would like to consider other demographic variables first, such as median age of offenders, indigenous status, and gender differences. By examining the median age of FDV offenders and median age of population in different states and regions, we conclude that there is not much difference between each state's statistics and do not draw any meaningful statistical correlation. For we know, most offenders happen to be in their 30s. This is, however, concurrent with demographic data of FTV by male offenders to female and children victims, which sparked interest in examining gender differences later. We decided to consider indigenous status as one of our stories because there is a prevalence of FDV cases in Northern Territory despite their small population. For instance, in 2018, there are 3,500 incidents among 2,300 total population, 1.5%, while the percentage of New South Wales are much less, as 0.35%. Hence, we would like to look at indigenous status of offenders in determining whether FTV is more likely to occur within this certain demographic group. Looking at this visualization, we can conclude that there is no surgence in data associated with indigenous and FTV number. Instead, the ratio between three different states are relatively similar, with indigenous offenders accounting to 1/5 of their non-indigenous counterpart. This actually tells a different story, as even though Northern Territory has a higher percentage of population having Aboriginal descent, the ratio remains similar to the other two states. Nevertheless, this is just mere observation and generalization. Last but not least, we would like to consider gender differences in FTV offenders in Australia. For this instance, we would use both number of offenders and racial average to compare and contrast the differences in using these two different variables. Despite both graphs showing the majority of male offenders compared to their female counterparts in all states, the gender differences are less as transparent in the later one. This could be explained as the male-female ratio in the total population is also skewed, with more males than females. Hence, using gender ratio variables will be more reflective in showing the likelihood of occurrences. Notably, by using the gender ratio variables of total population, Northern Territory saw a spike in its data, leading the pack as the state with the highest number of offenders per total population, showing significant rate of occurrence in this geographical region. On the other hand, New South Wales' counterpart seems significantly less, with only 147 people per 100,000 males as FTV offender ratio. Therefore, by encompassing this last variable, not only we are able to show the real picture of gender representation in FTV cases, but also take on another perspective of Northern Territory and New South Wales FTV overall pictures. In conclusion, FTV is a serious matter that requires more attention and intervention at different stages. By considering demographic variables, we will be able to identify susceptible and vulnerable groups in order to carry out community programs efficiently for the right people in the right time. These visualizations are means of assistance to that identification process and should not be taken as racial profiling in FTV or crimes in general. Further research regarding other variables, such as educational level, family sizes, salary and wages range, and their correlation to FTV cases are considered insightful and further unravel myths or misperceptions about FTVs in certain groups. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening. Is there any questions?